She agreed to the most absurd proposal she had ever heard in her life, only to discover a secret on that farm that no textbook could ever teach. Can you imagine being so desperate that you'd agree to live with 3 wild children, teach the impossible, and risk everything, including your heart, for a promise scribbled on a piece of old paper? But this actually happened in April 1958, deep in the Stone Ridge Mountains, in a forgotten town called St. Thomas Creek. Before we continue this story, make sure to subscribe to the channel and hit that like button down below, because the ending of this narrative is going to surprise you in ways you never imagined. What this poor young woman discovered on that ranch didn't just change her destiny, but saved an entire family that was standing on the edge of the abyss. And tell me in the comments, what city are you watching this story from? I love seeing where these narratives travel and whose hearts they touch. The afternoon of April 18th, 1958, fell cold and grey over St. Thomas Creek. A biting wind blew down from the mountains, carrying the scent of wood smoke and roasted chestnuts from the neighbouring houses and the dampness of rain threatening to break at any second. The giant pines surrounding the small valley swayed their heavy branches, making that ancient whispering sound that could give anyone goosebumps. The sky was heavy, thick dark clouds blocking out the sun that was already setting behind the distant ridges. Livia Sterling walked slowly down the main dirt road, her feet blistered inside worn-out shoes that were the only pair she owned. Every step hurt, but she didn't show it. She kept her head high, her back straight, even though inside her heart felt heavy as a stone sinking into dark water. She was 23 years old, but she carried the weight of a lifetime of accumulated loss on her shoulders. She was beautiful in a quiet, serious way. Dark brown hair pulled back into a low, tight bun at the nape of her neck, a few rebellious strands escaping in the wind. Pale skin, slightly sun-kissed on the cheekbones from spending entire days walking in the sun between the boarding house where she lived and the general store where she worked transcribing letters. Grey eyes, the colour of a winter sky, large and expressive, framed by thick lashes that were the only vanity nature had granted her. A fine, straight nose, and lips that were well-shaped but always pressed into a serious line. An oval face, perfect but too thin, her cheeks slightly hollow from irregular meals. She wore the only decent outfit she possessed, a navy blue wool skirt that had been her mother's, discreetly mended at the hem where the fabric had torn. A white cotton blouse with a high collar and long sleeves, clean and pressed, but so worn it was becoming transparent at the elbows. A grey knit cardigan draped over her shoulders, made by her own hands from scraps of wool she'd gathered over months. Thick cotton stockings and black leather shoes with cracked surfaces that pinched her toes. Tucked under her arm, she carried the only thing of value she owned, a thick, heavy book with a worn brown leather cover. It was an antique anthology of classic stories that had belonged to her father. The pages were yellowed, some loose, but she guarded that book like a treasure. It was all that remained of her parents, besides the memories that burned in her mind every night before sleep took her. Livia Sterling had been an orphan for exactly 7 months and 12 days. Not that she was counting the days to be dramatic, but because every day without her parents was a day survived against all odds. Her father, Professor Ray Sterling, and her mother, Stella Sterling, had been itinerant teachers. They traveled through the most isolated farms of the Appalachian foothills and into the Midwest, bringing literacy to the children of sharecroppers, tenant farmers, and small homesteaders who had no access to schools. They earned almost nothing. Most paid with food, a bed for a few nights, sometimes chickens or sacks of flour. But they were good people truly. Livia had grown up on the road, sleeping in wagons, in borrowed rooms, in haylofts. She learned to read at 4, sitting on her mother's lap while her father taught older children. By 8, she was helping with the lessons. By 15, she was teaching alone when her parents needed to split up between different farms. It was a hard life, but a happy one. Livia remembered her mother's laughter while preparing thin soup on a makeshift stove. She remembered her father reciting poetry at night, just to make the family smile. She remembered the sense of purpose, of making a difference, however small, in the lives of children who would never get another chance to learn. It all ended in September 1957. They were on an isolated farm near the state line when the Asian flu hit. First, it was her father. High fever, delirium, vomiting that wouldn't stop. The farmer called a local healer who gave bitter teas and prayed, but it was no use. Professor Ray died in 3 days, holding Livia's hand and asking her to continue their work, to never stop teaching, that education was the only weapon the poor had against injustice. Her mother fell ill the day after the funeral. The fever came even stronger, burning her from the inside out. Livia cared for her alone, desperate, not knowing what to do. She begged the farmer to send for a doctor from the city, but he refused, saying he wouldn't spend money on people who weren't even his kin. He offered more teas, more prayers. Stella lasted 5 days, 5 nights of agony that Livia would never forget. She died at dawn on a Sunday, with Livia holding her cold hand, softly singing the lullabies her mother used to sing when she was little. Livia buried her mother beside her father in a corner of the farm's cemetery, beneath a massive pine tree that cast a cool shadow. She stayed there for 3 whole days, sitting between the mounds of fresh earth, not eating, not speaking, just existing in the immense void that had opened up inside her chest. The farmer was polite but firm. He gave her $10 to help, said he was very sorry, but he needed the room where they had stayed for the new foreman arriving soon. Livia had a week to leave. She gathered her parents' few belongings into an old bundle, worn clothes, 2 books besides the anthology, her mother's Bible, the wooden cross her father had carved with his own hands, and she left that farm without looking back. She tried to continue her parents' work, offering lessons at other farms. But a young woman, alone, without family, without references, without the protection of a man, was not looked upon kindly. Doors closed before she could even finish explaining who she was. Some farmers looked at her in a way that made her skin crawl with disgust. Others simply said they didn't trust a single girl teaching their sons. The money ran out in 2 weeks. Livia went hungry for real for the first time in her life. She slept on roadsides, under bridges, in abandoned barns, until she arrived in St. Thomas Creek, a small town of maybe 300 souls, squeezed between the mountains. She went to the church to find the priest. Father Anselm was an old man, 70 or so, bent by the weight of age. He listened to Livia's story with a tired expression, then sighed deeply and said he couldn't help. The church had no resources, no way to house a single woman. People would talk, they would get the wrong idea. He suggested she look for relatives in another city. Livia explained she had no relatives. She had no one. Father Anselm made the sign of the cross, said she was in his prayers, and closed the vestry door. Livia stood in front of the church, feeling for the first time in her life pure and absolute despair, taking over every part of her body. Her legs gave way. She sat on the cold stone steps and let the tears come, silent and bitter. It was Mrs. Clementine who saved her that day. A widow in her 50s, owner of the only boarding house in town, she saw Livia crying and approached. She asked what had happened. Livia told her everything, voice choked, words tripping over each other. Mrs. Clementine listened in silence, then offered work and shelter. Livia could stay in a tiny room at the back of the boarding house, in exchange for cleaning, cooking, and helping with the guests. She wouldn't earn money, but she'd have a roof and food. Livia accepted immediately, gratitude filling her empty chest. The room was 6 feet by 6 feet, a narrow cot, a tiny window facing a wall, a permanent smell of mold. But it was shelter. It was safety. Livia worked hard, waking before the sun, sleeping after midnight. She cleaned, cooked, washed linens, served meals, all with silent efficiency. But what changed the situation was when Mrs. Clementine discovered Livia could read and write. Not just read, but read well, with fluency and comprehension. Most people in the village were illiterate or could only sign their own names. Suddenly, Livia became valuable in a different way. She began to copy letters for those who needed to send news to distant relatives. She charged 50 cents per letter, a small amount most could afford. She read documents, contracts, medicine instructions. She helped shopkeepers do their math, check invoices. The money was little, but it was hers. For the first time since her parents died, Livia felt a tiny thread of hope begin to grow again. It lasted 4 months, until March of 1958, when Mrs. Clementine fell ill. It started with a dry cough, then came fever, then chest pains. The doctor from the city came, examined her, shook his head. It was advanced tuberculosis. Mrs. Clementine needed to go to a sanatorium in the capital, a long and expensive treatment. The boarding house would be sold to pay the costs. Mrs. Clementine's nephew Val, a man of 40, fat and sweaty, arrived from the city to handle the sale of the property. He looked at Livia with poorly disguised contempt and said she had 2 weeks to leave. He wasn't going to maintain his aunt's charity cases. Livia tried to argue, offered to keep working for free just for the housing. Val laughed, his belly shaking, and said he wasn't an idiot to feed a useless mouth. And that was how Livia found herself with nothing again, walking down the main street of St. Thomas Creek on that cold April afternoon, with the few things she owned in a small bundle and the storybook under her arm. She was heading to Mr. Jacob's general store, the only place where she still had some sporadic work writing letters. Maybe he knew of a family needing a helper, someone to mind children, anything. Livia couldn't be picky. She needed a roof before night fell, and the temperature plummeted. The store sat in the center of town, a low building of wood painted a faded green, a roof of slightly crooked red shingles. It had a small porch out front with 2 benches where men sat to smoke and gossip. Double wooden doors always open, the smell of roasted coffee and rope tobacco drifting out. Livia was about 20 yards from the store when she saw the horse. It was a massive animal, black, gleaming, purebred, the kind of horse only very wealthy people owned. It was tied to the post in front of the store, a tooled leather saddle, reins with silver details. The owner of the horse was sitting on one of the porch benches. Livia recognized him immediately, even though she had never spoken to him. Everyone in town knew Benton Caldwell, at least by sight. He came once a month to buy supplies his ranch didn't produce. He was the owner of Highland Ridge Ranch, a massive property about 10 miles north of town, famous for its high-quality coffee crops and prize-winning cattle. Benton Caldwell was a tall man, easily over 6 feet. Broad shoulders of someone who does physical labor despite being the boss. He was 45 but looked younger. A face with strong masculine features, a square jaw, a strong chin with a small dimple in the middle. A straight aristocratic nose, thick dark eyebrows over deep-set eyes. His eyes were dark brown, almost black, with that depth of a man who has suffered too much and never became completely whole again. Black hair with white strands at the temples, cut short, combed back with pomade. He wore a well-trimmed moustache, also with some grey hairs. His skin was bronzed by the sun, fine lines at the corners of his eyes and deep creases between his brows, the mark of a man who frowned often. He wore the clothes of a prosperous rancher, beige canvas trousers, a white cotton shirt with sleeves rolled up to the elbows, a brown leather vest over the shirt, dark leather riding boots, well cared for. A dark brown felt hat lay on the bench beside him. But what drew the most attention was his expression. Benton Caldwell had the look of a man carrying an invisible but crushing weight. His broad shoulders seemed bowed by a burden no one else saw. His mouth was set in a hard line. He held a small cup of coffee but didn't drink, just stared into the dark liquid as if looking for answers inside. Livia looked away quickly. Rich folks didn't like being stared at by poor folks. She was going to walk straight past, enter the store through the side door, when she heard the voice. It was a woman's voice, shrill and full of poorly disguised malice. Mrs. Genevieve, the shopkeeper's wife, stood in the doorway of the store with an expression of cruel satisfaction on her red, fleshy face. She was looking at a boy of about 8, who was shrinking back near the wooden counter. The boy had patched but clean clothes, bare feet dirty with soil, a thin face with frightened eyes. "So you don't even know how to read your own name that your mama wrote on the note?" Mrs. Genevieve said loud enough for everyone to hear, her voice dripping with poison. "What a shame! A big boy like you, dumb as an animal. Your mama should have taught you at least that. But what can you expect from people who live in shacks, right?" The boy turned red with shame, tears starting to stream down his dirty face. He held a crumpled piece of paper in a trembling hand. He stammered, trying to explain himself, but the words wouldn't come out right. Something burned inside Livia's chest. It was pure anger, indignation boiling in her veins. Before she could think twice, she walked into the store with firm steps, went straight to the boy, and knelt in front of him, getting on his eye level. "May I see the note?" she asked gently, extending her hand. The boy hesitated, looked at Mrs. Genevieve, who huffed in irritation, then handed the paper to Livia. It was a simple note written in shaky handwriting. The boy's mother was asking for 2 pounds of cornmeal, a pound of beans, and half a pound of lard, promising to pay on Friday when she got paid by the boss. Livia read the note aloud, slowly and clearly, then looked at the boy. "Your mother asked for cornmeal, beans, and lard. She will pay on Friday. Understood?" The boy nodded, wiping his tears with the back of a dirty hand. Livia stood up and looked at Mrs. Genevieve. "He isn't dumb," she said, her voice calm but firm as steel. "He just hasn't learned yet. Nobody is born knowing how to read. Someone needs to teach them, and there are plenty of adults out there, grown folks who don't know either. That doesn't make anyone less human, doesn't make anyone worse. It just means a lack of opportunity." Mrs. Genevieve turned purple with rage. She looked Livia up and down, contempt stamped on her face. "And who are you to lecture me, girl? A pauper who doesn't even have a roof, living on charity, starving, no family, nothing. You are nothing, you are nobody. You should be thankful anyone pays you any mind." Silence fell heavy inside the store. Mr. Jacobs, the shopkeeper, an old man in his 60s, a good man but too weak to stand up to his wife, looked at the floor, embarrassed. The other customers averted their eyes. The boy looked at Livia with a mixture of admiration and fear. Livia felt her cheeks burn with humiliation. Her throat tightened painfully, as if invisible hands were strangling her from the inside. But she wouldn't cry, not here, not in front of that horrible woman. She grabbed the book that was under her arm, held it tight against her chest in a protective gesture, and turned to leave. That was when she heard the other voice, deep, gravelly, loaded with authority that didn't need to shout to be obeyed. "The lady is right," Benton Caldwell said. Everyone turned to look. He had risen from the porch bench and was standing in the doorway of the store. He was even taller up close, a presence that filled the entire space. He looked at Mrs. Genevieve with a hard expression. "Not knowing how to read isn't shameful," he continued. "Shameful is mocking those who haven't had the chance to learn. Shameful is humiliating a child. That is truly ugly behavior." Mrs. Genevieve went pale. Benton Caldwell was an important customer, bought in large quantities, paid on time. Offending him would be terrible for business. "I didn't mean to offend, Mr. Benton," she started with a meek, fake voice. "It was just a joke." Benton cut her off with an icy look. Doesn't look like a joke when it makes a child cry." He looked at the boy. "Get what your mother asked for," he said. "Mr. Jacobs will put it on the tab and your mother pays on Friday as agreed. And don't lower your head to anyone for not knowing how to read. You'll learn yet, God willing." The boy nodded vigorously, wiped the rest of his tears, and went to the counter where Mr. Jacobs was already preparing the supplies. Benton then looked at Livia. It was a long, appraising look, as if he were measuring something only he could see. Livia held his gaze, even though her stomach was twisting in tight knots. He had beautiful eyes, she realized. Sad, very sad, but beautiful. "What is your name?" he asked. "Livia Sterling," she replied, voice coming out firmer than she expected. Benton nodded once. "I need to speak with you," he said. "It's a serious matter, important." Livia blinked, surprised. "With me?" "Yes," he confirmed. "Can you join me on the porch? It'll only take a few minutes." Livia looked around. Everyone in the store was watching with blatant curiosity. Mrs. Genevieve had a sour expression like she'd sucked a lemon. Livia looked back at Benton and nodded. He made a polite gesture indicating the door. She passed first, feeling the weight of all the stairs on her back. The porch was empty now. The afternoon had cooled even more. The wind carried scattered raindrops that were beginning to fall. Benton picked up his hat, put it on his head, then looked at Livia. They stood in silence for a long moment. "You can read well," he said finally. It wasn't a question, it was a statement. Livia nodded. "Yes, I can. My parents were teachers. They taught me from a young age. And you know how to teach," he continued. "I saw how you spoke to the boy. The right way, without scaring him, without humiliating him." Livia didn't know where this was going. She stayed quiet, waiting. Benton sighed deeply, rubbed a hand over his face in the gesture of a man tired down to his bones. "I have 3 children," he began in a low voice. "Mason is 16, Beatrice is 13, Nico is 10. They are good boys, hard-working, know everything about ranching, planting, cattle, but they don't know how to read. Not a single letter. Can't even sign their own names." He paused. The shame and pain were visible on his face. Livia waited in silence. "It's my fault," Benton continued. "After my wife died, I buried myself in work. I hired tutors to teach the boys. But they were bad men, lazy, just wanted easy money. I was so lost in my own grief I didn't pay attention. When I finally woke up, it was too late. The boys grew up rough, wild, and illiterate." His voice cracked a little on the last word. Livia felt her chest tighten with compassion. Benton took a deep breath, composed his expression. "I tried again, hired other teachers, but none lasted. The boys are difficult, disobedient, violent even. They chase them all away, and I don't know what else to do. I see them signing documents with a thumbprint, trusting lawyers who might be lying, depending on dishonest folks to read contracts. I'm afraid for their future, afraid of what will happen when I die, and they're left alone, defenseless." He looked directly into Livia's eyes. "I need someone to teach them, someone firm, patient, who won't give up. Someone who understands that education is more than memorizing letters. It's giving them a weapon to defend themselves against the world. I saw how you defended that boy. I saw the firmness, the kindness, and I thought that maybe, just maybe, you were the right person." Livia felt her heart accelerate violently. Was he offering a job? She wasn't sure. "I don't have formal experience," she said hesitantly. "I never taught in a school. I just helped my parents." "I don't need a diploma," Benton replied. "I need someone who truly cares. Someone who sees my children as people, not animals. And I need someone who stays, who doesn't quit at the first problem." He paused again. Livia saw his hands grip the hat with a force that turned his knuckles white, and then he dropped the bomb. "I'm going to make a proposal that will sound insane," he said. "But it is a serious, honest proposal. I will give you my ranch if you teach my children to read. The entire ranch, all the land, the house, the cattle, the coffee crops, everything. In 1 year, if they know how to read, write, do basic math, and become responsible people, I will transfer everything to your name." Livia stood completely still. The world stopped. The wind stopped. The rain stopped. Everything stopped. She blinked several times, trying to process the words she had just heard. "Are you serious, sir?" she managed to say finally, voice coming out raspy. "Completely serious," Benton replied. "I have a lawyer who will draw up a legal contract registered at the courthouse. 1 year of work. If you achieve what I ask, the ranch is yours." "But," Livia started, "but nothing makes sense. Why would you do that? Why give everything away?" "Because my children are worth more than dirt," Benton answered, simple as that. "Because I'd rather die poor knowing they have a future than die rich leaving them helpless. And because I've tried everything and nothing worked. This is my last attempt, my last resort. If you accept, you will live on the ranch in a separate room. You will have everything you need, food, clothes, respect. I only ask one thing, that you stay, that you don't give up, that you give everything you have to teach my boys." Livia looked at that man. She saw real desperation in his eyes, saw a father's love fighting against crushing guilt, and she felt something move inside her chest. It wasn't just an opportunity to have a roof and food. It was a chance to do what her parents did. It was a chance to honor their memory. It was a chance to transform lives. But there was also fear. Fear of failing. Fear of not being able to. Fear of the unknown. She was a poor girl with nothing, no one. He was a rich rancher offering a fortune. It seemed like a fairy tale, and fairy tales didn't exist in real life. "Can I think about it?" she asked. Benton nodded. "Until noon tomorrow," he said. "I'll be here. If you accept, bring your things. We go straight to the ranch and start immediately." Livia nodded, mind spinning in tight circles. Benton took the horse's reins, mounted with the fluid, natural movement of someone who spent a lifetime in the saddle. He looked at her one last time. "Think carefully," he said. "It won't be easy. My children will make your life hell in the beginning. They will test you in every way. But if you can reach them, if you can show them that education matters, you will change not just their future, but that of many people around them. Education spreads like fire in dry grass. An educated person teaches another, who teaches another. You can start something big." He touched the brim of his hat in a respectful greeting and rode down the main street, disappearing around the bend that led out of town. Livia stood on the porch, rain starting to fall for real now, wetting her face, her hair, her clothes. But she didn't even feel it. She just held the book against her chest and thought of her parents who died teaching, thought of the humiliated boy in the store, thought of Benton's 3 children, grown without letters, vulnerable to a cruel world. Thought of the impossible proposal that could be a trap or could be a miracle. She spent the entire night awake in the tiny room at the boarding house. Mrs. Clementine had already gone to the sanatorium. Val was sleeping drunk in the main bedroom. Livia sat on the narrow bed, a weak oil lamp illuminating the cramped space, and opened her father's anthology. She read the dedication he had written on the first page so many years ago. "To Livia, my darling daughter, may letters be your wings and your armor. Fly high and protect yourself always. With all my love, your father." The tears came. Livia let them fall, wetting the yellowed page. Her parents would give anything for an opportunity like this, would give anything to be able to teach children who really needed it. And was she going to waste it out of fear? When the sun rose, painting the sky pink and orange behind the mountains, Livia had already made her decision. She gathered her things in the small bundle, placed the book on top, put on her knit cardigan, and left the boarding house without looking back. She arrived at the store before noon. Benton was already there, sitting on the same bench, same hat, same grave expression. He saw Livia arriving with the bundle and stood up slowly. "I accept," Livia said before he could ask. "I will teach your children, and I won't give up." Benton closed his eyes for a second, visible relief washing over his tense face. When he opened his eyes again, there was something new there. A small, tiny hope, but real. "Then let's go," he said. "We have a lot of work ahead of us." The journey to Highland Ridge Ranch took a little over 2 hours. Benton had brought a covered wagon pulled by 2 horses. He put Livia inside, protected from the fine drizzle that was still falling. He drove himself, sitting up front, exposed to the weather, without complaining of the cold that cut the skin. Livia remained silent for almost the entire trip, looking through the side opening of the waxed canvas cover. The dirt road climbed through the mountains, snaking between massive pines that rose like ancient giants on both sides. The smell was of wet earth, fresh pine needles fallen on the ground, and something wilder, purer, coming from the dense forest around them. They passed small homesteads with wooden houses and smoke rising from chimneys. Barefoot children stopped playing to watch the wagon pass. Women washing clothes in the creek waved. Men working in the fields lifted their hats in respectful greeting when they recognized Benton. The further they got from the village, the more isolated the path became. The forest grew thicker, darker. The sound was just the creaking of wheels on dirt, the clatter of horse hooves, the song of unknown birds, and the wind whistling through the pines. Livia felt her stomach tighten with anxiety. 1,000 questions hammered in her head. What would Benton's children be like? Would they be as terrible as he warned? Could she really teach them? And if she failed? And if she couldn't handle it? What if this was all a big mistake? But it was too late to turn back. She had made a choice, and she was going to honor it to the end. Finally, after climbing a last steep hill, the ranch appeared in the valley below. Livia held her breath. It was much larger than she had imagined. The main house was a 2-story construction. Wooden walls painted white, a high roof of red shingles, wide porches circling the entire perimeter. Large windows with green frames, some with cracked or missing glass. A front garden that must have been beautiful once but was now abandoned, with dry rose bushes, tall grass, flower beds invaded by weeds. On the right side were massive barns, coffee storage, stables, tool shed, smokehouse. On the left side, there were at least 10 smaller houses where the sharecroppers and employees lived. Further back, descending down the mountain slope, stretched infinite coffee fields, perfect rows of green bushes laden with fruit. Benton stopped the wagon in front of the main house. He got down, tied the horses, and offered his hand to help Livia down. She accepted, feeling his large, calloused hand envelop hers for a brief second. "Welcome to Highland Ridge Ranch," he said with a formal, almost ceremonial voice. Livia looked around, trying to absorb everything. Up close, the house was even more deteriorated. The paint was peeling in several places. Some steps of the porch stairs were broken. Spiderwebs occupied the corners, but even so there was beauty there, the beauty of something that was once grand and could be again. "Where are the children?" Livia asked, noticing the heavy silence covering everything. "Must be around back," Benton replied. "I sent word yesterday saying I was bringing the new teacher, probably planning how to make your life impossible." He said this without a smile, just stating a fact. Livia swallowed hard. Benton took her small bundle and walked up the porch steps. "I'll show you your room first," he said. "Then I'll introduce you to the children and to Mrs. Elvira, the cook." They entered the house. The interior was spacious but gloomy. A large living room with heavy, dark wood furniture covered by dusty white sheets, faded Persian rugs on the wide plank floors, paintings on the walls showing rural landscapes and portraits of serious people. Thick curtains blocking the weak afternoon light, smell of beeswax, mold, and something older, as if the entire house had been holding its breath for years. Benton climbed a wide staircase that creaked with every step. The second-floor hallway was long, with closed wooden doors on both sides. He stopped at the third door on the right and opened it. "This will be your room," he said. Livia entered and looked around. It was a medium-sized room with a single bed against the wall, a solid wood wardrobe, a small table with a chair near the window that overlooked the coffee fields down below. Everything was clean, tidy, smelling of fresh lavender. "Mrs. Elvira prepared it for you," explained Benton, placing her bundle on the bed. "The bathroom is the door next to it. Water comes from a mountain spring. It's cold but clean. Towels are in the closet." Livia nodded, not knowing what to say. It was much more than she had expected. Benton stood in the doorway for a moment, as if he wanted to say something else but didn't know how. Finally, he sighed. "The children's rooms are at the end of the hall," he said. "Mason and Nico share one. Beatrice has hers. My room is downstairs on the ground floor, and there is a room that stays locked, right there in the middle of the hall. Don't go in there. It was my wife's. No one goes in." His voice became hard and laden with pain on the last sentence. Livia saw the shadow cross his face like a dark cloud blocking the sun. "I understand," she said softly. "I won't go in." Benton nodded, recovering his composure with visible effort. "Come down when you're ready," he said. "I'll introduce you to everyone. Ah, and Livia," he called as he was leaving. She looked. "Thank you," he said, "for accepting, for trying. It means more than you imagine." And he left before she could respond, heavy footsteps descending the stairs. Livia stood alone in the room, heart beating fast. She put her few clothes in the wardrobe, placed her father's book on the small table, washed her face in the basin of cold water, fixed her hair, took several deep breaths, trying to calm the nerves that seemed to want to jump out of her throat. When she finally went down, she found Benton in the kitchen talking to an older woman. The kitchen was large, with a huge wood-burning stove on one side, a long wooden table in the middle, shelves full of clay pots and tins. The good smell of fresh bread and strong coffee filled the air. The woman turned when Livia entered. She was about 58, grey hair pulled into a tight bun, a wrinkled but gentle face, kind, light brown eyes. She wore a simple brown dress and a white apron tied at the waist. "This is Mrs. Elvira," introduced Benton. "Cook of the ranch for over 20 years. Takes care of everything inside here. Mrs. Elvira, this is Livia, the children's new teacher." Mrs. Elvira wiped her hands on her apron and extended one to Livia. "Welcome, child," she said with a raspy but warm voice. "May God give you patience and strength, because you're going to need plenty of both." Livia shook her hand, feeling the calluses of years of hard work. "Thank you," she replied. "I'll do my best." Mrs. Elvira shook her head slowly. "We've had 5 teachers here," she said. "None lasted more than 3 weeks. The boys are difficult, very difficult, especially Mason. That one is pure fire." Benton sighed deeply. "Where are they?" he asked. Mrs. Elvira pointed to the back door, out back near the barn, pretended they weren't curious, but I saw them peeking through the window when you arrived. Benton looked at Livia. "Do you want to meet them now?" he asked. "Or prefer to rest a little first?" "Now," replied Livia, with a firmness she didn't feel. "Better not to delay." They went out the back door. The yard was huge, with a chicken coop on one side, an abandoned vegetable garden on the other, a covered well in the middle. Further back stood a large wooden barn with open doors. 3 figures were standing in front of the barn, looking in their direction with expressions ranging from curiosity to pure hostility. The oldest was clearly Mason. He was 16 but looked older, the already developed body of a young man. Tall like his father, he must have been 5'9". Broad shoulders, muscular arms from heavy farm work, a handsome face with strong features, square jaw, straight nose, dark brown eyes like his father's, black wavy hair falling over his forehead, bronze skin, some scars on his arms from scratches and cuts. He wore canvas trousers dirty with earth, a sleeveless shirt showing defined muscles, worn boots. His expression was pure defiance, chin up, eyes narrowed, mouth pressed into a hard line. Beside him stood Beatrice. She was 13 but was tiny, skinny, delicate. Light brown hair, long and straight, tied in a thick braid that fell down her back. A fine face with large brown eyes, small upturned nose, pink mouth. She wore a simple light blue dress, clean but patched in several places. Bare feet. She looked at Livia with a curious but guarded expression, like a small animal assessing whether to trust or flee. The youngest, Nico, was half hidden behind Mason. He was 10, a thin and small boy for his age. Light brown hair, just like his sister's, cut somewhat crookedly as if someone had done it in a rush. A face with freckles on his cheeks, bright and intelligent green eyes, a smile with a missing front tooth. Clothes all too big, likely inherited from his brothers. Feet also bare. He didn't seem hostile like Mason, just curious and a little scared. Benton stopped about 10 feet away from his children. "Children," he said with a firm voice, "this is Livia Sterling. She's going to be your teacher starting today. She will live here in the house and give lessons every day. I expect you to treat her with respect." Mason took a step forward. "We don't need a teacher," he said, with a deep voice full of barely contained anger. "We already sent 5 packing. This one won't be any different. We don't want to learn useless letters. We know everything we need to know." Benton tensed. "You will learn, Mason," he said in a low, dangerous voice. "It is not a choice. It is an order." Mason laughed, a humorless sound. "Or what? Gonna hit me? Gonna kick me off the ranch? I'm your son, your only male heir. You can't do anything to me." The tension in the air became so thick, Livia felt it hard to breathe. Benton and Mason stared each other down, 2 bulls ready to charge. It was Livia who broke the silence. She took a step forward, standing beside Benton. "Hello," she said, with a calm and clear voice, looking directly at Mason. "My name is Livia. I understand you don't want a teacher. I understand you've had bad experiences, but I am here, and I am going to stay. I won't give up easy." Mason looked her up and down with contempt. "You're too tiny," he said. "Weak. You're gonna cry and run just like the others." Livia held his gaze without blinking. "Maybe," she replied honestly, "but maybe not. Let's find out together." Beatrice gave a low giggle. "I like her," she said to no one in particular. "At least she's honest." Mason shot a furious look at his sister. "Shut your mouth, Bee." Beatrice shrugged, but Livia saw the glint of rebellion in her eyes. Nico came out from behind his brother. "Do you know how to read real books?" he asked with a thin, curious voice. Livia nodded. "Yes, I do. Many books. And do you like stories?" His eyes lit up. "I do. Mrs. Elvira tells stories sometimes, but she doesn't know many." "Then I can tell stories to you," offered Livia. "Stories of adventure, of heroes, of distant places." Nico grinned wide, showing the gap in his teeth. "I want that," Mason huffed, irritated. "Don't fall for that trick, Nico. She just wants to fool us." Livia turned to Mason. "I'm not trying to fool anyone," she said. "I am offering to teach. You can accept or refuse, but I will be here every day, trying. And eventually, when you are ready, we will learn together." "I'll never be ready," growled Mason. "Never." And he turned his back, walking into the barn with furious steps. Beatrice hesitated, looked at Livia with an expression difficult to read, then followed her brother. Nico stayed behind, waving timidly before running after the others. Benton let out a long, tired breath. "Welcome to hell," he said bitterly. "Sorry about that. Mason is the worst. Carries a lot of anger inside." Livia looked at the barn where the three had disappeared. "He's angry at what?" she asked. "At me," replied Benton with a voice heavy with guilt. "For failing them, for letting them grow up wild, for not giving what they needed when their mother died. And mostly he's angry at himself for not knowing how to do basic things any boy his age should know." They went back inside the house. Mrs. Elvira served strong coffee and bread with butter. Livia ate slowly, savoring real food after days of hunger. Benton sat at the head of the long table, stirring his coffee without drinking, lost in thought. "How did your wife die?" asked Livia gently. "If you don't mind telling." Benton remained silent for a long time. Mrs. Elvira, who was washing dishes at the sink, stopped and looked at him with concern. "It was during Nico's birth," said Benton finally, voice hoarse. "Started wrong from the beginning. She took sick, bleeding that wouldn't stop. I called the midwife from town, but it was too big a problem. Needed a doctor, a hospital. But it was raining hard. Roads were mud pits, couldn't travel. She suffered 3 days. In the end, Nico was born, but Isabel didn't make it. Died in my arms, making me promise I'd take good care of the children." His voice broke on the last word. Livia felt tears sting her eyes. "And does Nico know," she asked softly, "that his mother died in his birth?" Benton shook his head. "Mason told him when he was 6, said Nico was guilty, that he killed his mother. I beat Mason that day, was the only time I hit any of my children, but the damage was already done." Heavy silence fell over the kitchen. Mrs. Elvira was wiping tears with the corner of her apron. Livia felt her heart breaking, for that family shattered by tragedy and guilt no one deserved to carry. "I will need materials to teach," said Livia, changing the subject to give everyone an emotional breather. "Paper, pencils, chalk, a slate if there is one, and books, as many as you can find." Benton nodded. "There's everything stored in the study," he said. "Previous teachers left a lot of stuff. I'll show you later." "And regarding payment," he started. "I don't want payment beyond housing and food," interrupted Livia. "The agreement is the ranch at the end of the year if I succeed. That is sufficient." Benton looked at her with a strange expression. "You still think it's possible," he asked, "to succeed in teaching them?" Livia held his gaze. "I have to believe it's possible," she replied. "Otherwise it isn't even worth trying." The first few days were exactly the hell Benton had predicted. Livia prepared the old study room on the ground floor, cleaning accumulated dust, organizing the table and chairs, hanging a slate on the wall. She woke up early, had breakfast with Mrs. Elvira, and at 8 o'clock sharp went to call the children. Mason simply refused to show up. He stayed in the fields working with the sharecroppers or disappeared on horseback around the ranch. Beatrice appeared sometimes, sat at the back of the room with a bored expression, but participated in nothing. Nico was the only one who came regularly, but he was restless, touching everything, unable to concentrate for more than 5 minutes. Livia tried everything, started with the basic alphabet, drawing large letters on the slate. Nico looked for a few seconds, then asked if he could go play outside. Beatrice rolled her eyes. Mason wasn't even there. She tried games, songs, stories. Nico was interested in the stories, but the moment she tried to connect them to letters, he lost interest. Beatrice listened to the stories, but pretended she wasn't paying attention, looking out the window with a distant expression. A whole week passed like this, then 2. Livia felt frustration rising like a tide coming in. Every night she lay in bed and thought about giving up. It would be so easy. Pack her things and go back to town. But then she remembered her parents, remembered the promise she had made, and got up the next day determined to try again. It was at the beginning of the third week, on a warm May morning, that everything began to change. Livia was in the kitchen helping Mrs. Elvira peel potatoes when she heard shouting coming from the yard. She ran outside and saw Mason holding Nico by the arm with force, shaking the boy. "You are too stupid," shouted Mason. "Can't even put the chickens in the coop right. Let 3 escape. Dad is going to be furious." Nico was crying, trying to break free. "I tried," he sobbed. "They ran too fast." Mason let go of his brother with a shove that made Nico fall seated on the ground. "You're good for nothing," he said with contempt. "Just like me. Useless dummies." Livia saw red. She crossed the yard in quick strides and stood between Mason and Nico. "Don't speak to your brother like that," she said with a firm and furious voice. "He is 10 years old. He is learning. Everyone makes mistakes sometimes." Mason looked at her with surprise and then anger. "Get out of the way, useless teacher. This isn't your business." "Yes, it is," replied Livia without moving. "Anything that happens on this ranch is my business now, and you will not humiliate your brother anymore. Never again." Mason took a threatening step in her direction. "You don't boss me around," he growled. Livia lifted her chin, staring down that boy-man who was nearly a foot taller than her. "No, I don't," she agreed, "but I will defend who needs defending, and if you have so much anger inside, use it for something useful instead of taking it out on a child." For a moment it looked like Mason was going to explode. His fists were clenched, jaw locked, eyes flashing, but then something changed. The anger gave way to something else. Pain. Deep and ancient pain he hid beneath all the fury. "You don't understand anything," he said with a broken voice. "Don't understand what it's like to be dumb, to be incapable, to be less than the others. I live in fear of someone handing me a paper to sign and having to admit I don't even know what's written there. I feel shame every time I need to ask someone to read something for me. I feel small, weak, an idiot." Livia felt her heart squeeze. She took a step toward Mason, voice becoming soft. "You aren't dumb," she said, "never were. Just never had anyone teach you right. But it isn't too late. There is still time. I can teach you, if you let me." Mason shook his head violently. "Already tried with the other teachers," he said bitterly. "I can't do it. The letters dance in front of me, don't make sense. I'm too stupid." "Or the teachers were just too bad," countered Livia. "Every person learns a different way. We need to discover what your way is, but for that you need to try for real, need to trust me." Mason looked at her for a long time. Livia saw the struggle happening inside him, pride against desperation, anger against hope. Finally he sighed, shoulders slumping in defeat. "1 week," he said. "I give you 1 week. If it doesn't work, I quit for good and you stop bothering me." Livia nodded. 1 week, she agreed. "But you have to come every day and try for real." Mason mumbled something unintelligible, but that sounded like agreement. He turned and walked toward the barns. Livia helped Nico stand up. "Are you okay?" she asked. Nico wiped his tears and nodded. "You were brave," he said with admiration. "Mason is big and scary." Livia smiled. "Sometimes we need courage to do what is right," she said, "even when we're scared." That night, during the silent dinner they shared in the large and gloomy dining room, Mason appeared. He arrived late, grumbling, but he arrived. He sat heavily in the chair, served himself beans and rice, and ate in silence. But he was there, and Livia saw Benton look at his son with an expression of surprise and careful hope. The following day, Mason appeared in the study room. He walked in with a sullen expression, sat in the very last chair, and crossed his arms tight across his chest. Beatrice was there too, curious to see what was going to happen. Nico was already sitting in the front, swinging his legs. Livia had prepared something different. Instead of starting with abstract letters, she had written concrete words related to the ranch on the slate chalkboard. Horse, cow, coffee, plow, earth. "Let's start with words you know," she explained. Words from your life. She pointed to the first word. Does anyone know what is written here? Silence. Nico squirmed in his chair. Beatrice looked at the board with a concentrated expression. Mason kept his arms crossed, but looked as well. I'll give you a hint, Livia said. It's an animal you ride every day. A big, strong animal with 4 legs. Nico jumped up excitedly. Horse! That's right, confirmed Livia, smiling. Horse, horse. Let's look at each letter. She spent the next hour breaking down the word, showing the sounds of each letter, having them repeat it, then writing it in the air with her finger. Nico participated enthusiastically. Beatrice began to repeat it softly, and Mason, when he thought no one was looking, moved his lips along with them. At the end of the lesson, Livia gave paper and pencils to each one. Try to copy the word horse, she asked. It doesn't have to be perfect, just try. Nico gripped the pencil too hard, tongue sticking out in concentration. He made huge, crooked letters, but they were recognizable. Beatrice made small, shaky letters, and Mason, after much hesitation, formed the letters slowly, with excessive care. When they held up the papers, Livia felt emotion rise in her throat. Very good, she said, her voice thick. Very good indeed. You see, you can do it. You just need practice. Something changed that day. Mason was still resistant, still grumbled, but he came back every day. Beatrice started sitting closer. Nico wasn't so restless anymore. The lessons became a routine, every day from 8 until noon. After lunch, free time. Then, in the late afternoon, Livia asked them to practice reading signs around the ranch, labels on tools, anything with letters. Mrs. Elvira noticed the change. She commented to Livia one afternoon while they prepared dinner together. I don't know what you're doing, child, said the cook, but it's working. Haven't seen those children so interested in anything for years, especially Mason. That boy carries so much weight, I sometimes think he's going to break. Livia chopped carrots, thoughtful. He blames himself for not knowing how to read, she said. Thinks he's weak because of it. I need to show him that true strength is admitting you don't know and wanting to learn anyway. Mrs. Elvira stopped stirring the pot and looked at Livia. You're a special young woman, she said with affection. Different from the others. You have a real heart. These boys needed someone like that. Livia felt her cheeks flush. I'm just doing my job, she murmured. Mrs. Elvira shook her head. It's not just a job. You care, and that makes all the difference in the world. It was at the end of the 4th week, on a rainy afternoon in May, that Livia discovered Beatrice's secret. The girl had come to class, sat in the front for the first time, and was trying to read a simple sentence Livia had written on the slate. The cat sat on the roof. Beatrice started slowly. The k-k-k-k. She froze, tried again, froze once more. Her face turned red with frustration. Mason huffed impatiently. Just say it, Bea. It's easy. Beatrice tried one more time, but the stutter got worse. Her eyes filled with tears. She stood up suddenly, knocking over her chair, and ran out of the room. Livia went after her, finding Beatrice sitting under a giant pine tree behind the house, crying with her face hidden in her bent knees. She sat beside her in silence, waiting. I can't, sobbed Beatrice. When I try to say the words, I freeze. It's always been like this. Worse when I get nervous. Livia placed a gentle hand on the girl's back. I understand, she said softly. It must be very hard. But do you know what I discovered? You can read in your head. I saw you reading when you thought no one was looking. The problem is just speaking aloud, right? Beatrice nodded miserably. I'm ashamed. Mason mocks me. Nico asks why I talk weird. Livia thought quickly. Then let's do it differently, she proposed. "You don't need to read aloud in front of the others. You can read to me, just us two. No rush, no pressure. And to practice speaking, let's use music and poetry. Singing is different from speaking. Sometimes it helps." Beatrice lifted her tear-stained face. You think?" Livia nodded. "I do. I've seen it work with other people. Want to try?" From then on, Livia began giving individual lessons to Beatrice in the late afternoon. She discovered the girl had a natural talent for words. She memorized entire poems just by hearing them once. She understood metaphors and deep meanings, and when she sang, the words came out fluid, without stumbling. By early June, 2 months after Livia had arrived at the ranch, the progress was visible. Mason could read simple words now. He still struggled with long sentences, but he didn't give up anymore. He spent hours practicing, tongue between his teeth, forehead furrowed in fierce concentration. Beatrice devoured short stories Livia gave her, reading in silence with impressive speed. And Nico learned faster than everyone, his agile mind absorbing information like a sponge. And Livia noticed something else changing too: the atmosphere of the house. Once so heavy and sad, it began to have moments of lightness. Occasional laughter during lessons when someone made a funny mistake. Conversations during dinners that used to be silent. Doors slamming less often. Small smiles appearing. And Benton was changing too. He was still a serious man, burdened by ancient sadness. But Livia noticed how he observed the lessons sometimes, standing discreetly at the door of the study. How he asked about the children's progress with genuine interest. How he began to participate more in dinner conversations, sharing stories about the ranch, asking questions about what they had learned. One night, after the children had gone to sleep, Benton knocked on the door of the library where Livia was reading. "May I come in?" he asked. Livia closed her book. "Of course." Benton entered, standing near the door as if he didn't quite know what to do. "I wanted to thank you," he said finally, "for the boys, for Bea, for what you're doing with them. It's working. Truly. I see a difference in every one of them." Livia smiled. "They are good children," she said. "They just needed someone who believed in them." Benton nodded. "And someone who wouldn't give up. You didn't give up, even when it was hard." "I promised I wouldn't," Livia replied. "And I keep my promises." There was silence. Benton looked at her with a strange expression. "Can I ask you one more thing?" he said hesitantly. Livia waited. "Can you teach me too? I know you already have work with the children, but I need to learn. I need to be able to read contracts, documents, letters. I need to stop depending on lawyers for everything." Livia felt something tighten in her chest. She saw the vulnerability in his eyes, the courage it took to ask. "Of course," she said softly. "I can teach you after the children sleep, if you aren't too tired." Benton let out a breath he seemed to be holding. "Thank you," he said, his voice hoarse. "It means a lot." And that was how the night classes began. Every night after dinner, after putting the children to bed, Benton and Livia met in the library. They sat side by side at the large wooden table, a kerosene lamp casting golden light over the pages of the books. It was different from teaching the children. Benton was a grown man, used to commanding, to knowing everything, and admitting he couldn't read was a deep wound in his pride. But he forced himself to try, night after night, large calloused fingers holding the pencil awkwardly, forming shaky letters on the paper. Livia discovered things about him in these silent hours. She discovered he had a dry sense of humor he rarely showed. She discovered he loved the ranch with an almost religious passion, every tree, every rock, every inch of soil. She discovered he read people with impressive ease, understanding motivations and feelings without needing words. And Benton discovered things about Livia too. He discovered she had inexhaustible inner strength hidden beneath her fragile appearance. He discovered she laughed when she was tired, a low, musical laugh. He discovered she bit her lower lip when she was concentrated, an unconscious gesture he was beginning to find charming in a dangerous way. Their hands touched sometimes when Benton passed the notebook for her to correct. Glances held for a second longer than necessary. Comfortable silences settled between them, and Mrs. Elvira, observant as always, saw everything and smiled to herself while preparing breakfast. If you are enjoying this story, leave a like and share it with someone who needs to believe in second chances and the power education has to transform lives. It was in the first week of July, 3 months after Livia had arrived at the ranch, that the lawyer appeared. Livia was in the library organizing books when she heard loud voices coming from the office next door. One was Benton's, the other she didn't know, a younger man's voice, smooth and fake, like oil on water. "Benton, my friend," said the unknown voice, "I came to bring the papers you asked for. Documents for the sale of those 10 acres on the north border, all ready to sign." Livia tensed. She knew she should leave, give them privacy, but something in that man's voice made her uncomfortable. She stayed quiet, listening unintentionally. "Read it to me first," Benton asked. "I want to be sure everything is right as we agreed." The other voice laughed. "Benton, we've trusted each other for years. You know I would never deceive you. It's a simple sale, 10 acres for $20,000. "Even so," insisted Benton firmly. "Read it." There was a pause. Then the voice began to read, fast and monotonous. Livia heard mentions of values, dates, land descriptions. But something was wrong. The man's voice sped up in certain parts, skipped words, read too fast. Something compelled her. She got up from the armchair, left the library and knocked on the office door. "Sorry to interrupt," she said when Benton opened it, "but I need to speak with you, sir. It's urgent, about tomorrow's lesson." Benton looked at her, surprised. "Go ahead," he said. Livia cast a glance at the other man. He was a fellow in his early 30s, thin, tall, blonde hair, combed with pomade, a thin moustache, a well-cut grey suit, pale blue eyes, cold as ice. He smiled, but the smile didn't reach his eyes. "It's private," insisted Livia. Benton hesitated, then turned to the man. "Attorney Vance, this matter will take a few minutes. Excuse me?" Vance narrowed his eyes, looking at Livia with an appraising and unpleasant expression. "Of course," he said with a honeyed voice. "I'll wait on the porch." He left, closing the door with unnecessary force. Benton looked at Livia. "What is it?" he asked. Livia pointed to the papers on the desk. "May I see those documents?" she asked. "Just to be sure everything is right." Benton frowned in confusion, but handed over the papers. Livia read slowly, line by line. At first, everything seemed normal. But when she reached the final clause, written in small, almost illegible print at the bottom of the second page, her blood ran cold. There it was written that Benton agreed to put up as collateral for the sale not only the 10 acres mentioned, but also the main house and another 50 acres of the ranch's most productive land. If he didn't pay in 6 months, he lost everything. Livia read it again, ensuring she understood correctly. Then she looked at Benton with urgency. "You cannot sign this, sir," she said with a voice trembling with anger. "It is a trap. He's trying to steal half your ranch." She showed him the clause, read it aloud to Benton. She saw his face turn pale, then red with fury. "That bastard," he growled. "I thought he was a friend, thought I could trust him." Livia placed her hand on his arm without thinking, a comforting gesture. "That is why you need to learn to read," she said gently but firmly. "To not depend on anyone. To protect yourself." Benton looked at her hand on his arm. Then he looked into her eyes. "Thank you," he said, voice hoarse with emotion. "You just saved everything I built my entire life." They were interrupted by the door opening forcefully. Vance entered, a dangerous expression on his face. "Any problem?" he asked with an icy voice. Benton squared his shoulders. "Yes," he replied. "This sale is not happening. Get off my ranch, now." Vance's face twisted into a mask of hatred. "You will regret this," he hissed. "You will regret it greatly." He looked at Livia with pure contempt. "Because of some poor little schoolteacher you stuffed in your house? Has she taken leave of your senses?" "Get out," repeated Benton, voice low and deadly, "before I throw you out by force." Vance threw the papers on the desk with violence. "This doesn't end here," he threatened. "I will destroy you, Benton Caldwell, and your shitty little farm too. I have other contracts. I have other ways to get what I want." He left, slamming doors. The sound echoed through the whole house. Livia and Benton were left alone in the office, silence vibrating with the tension of the confrontation. Benton ran a hand over his face, a gesture of deep exhaustion. "I need to verify every contract I signed with him," he said, "all documents from the last few years. If he lied this time, he might have lied before." "I can help," offered Livia. "I can read everything, check every clause." Benton looked at her, and for the first time, Livia saw something new in his eyes. It wasn't just gratitude. It was something warmer, deeper, something that made her heart race and her breath catch. "Please," he said, "help me. Help me protect what is mine, what belongs to my children." They spent the next 3 days locked in the office, reviewing mountains of papers. Benton brought documents stored for years. Sale contracts, purchase agreements, loans, partnerships. Livia read each one aloud, explaining legal terms, pointing out suspicious clauses. They found 2 more attempts at fraud. Contracts where Vance had added clauses after the signature. Nothing as grave as the first one, but enough to prove bad faith. Benton grew more furious with each discovery. "He relied on my trust," he repeated bitterly. "Took advantage that I couldn't read to steal." "But he didn't succeed," Livia reminded him, "because now you are learning, you are defending yourself." At the end of the second week of July, Mason managed to read a whole sentence without making a mistake. "The ranch has very good coffee." He said it slowly, carefully, but he said it. When he finished, he looked at Livia with an expression of pure triumph. "I did it," he said, astonished. "I really did it." Livia smiled so wide her cheeks hurt. "Yes, you did. And you will achieve much more." That night at dinner, Mason told his father, Benton listened attentively, then stood up, went to his son, and hugged him. It was a long, tight embrace. "I am proud of you," he said, voice thick with emotion. "Very proud." Mason, the tough boy man who never cried, began to weep right there in front of everyone. He cried out years of frustration, shame, of feeling lesser than. And Benton cried too, holding his son, silently apologizing for taking so long to help. Livia, Mrs. Elvira, Beatrice, and Nico watched in respectful silence. And when they finally separated, something had changed. The anger Mason carried had diminished. It hadn't disappeared completely, but it had lessened. By the end of July, 4 months after Livia had arrived, the routine of the ranch had transformed. Mornings were dedicated to lessons. Afternoons to work in the fields, but now with breaks for reading practice. Evenings were for lessons with Benton, conversations that extended beyond letters, touching on deeper subjects. One night, Benton told her about how he met Isabel. She was the daughter of a merchant in town. He read from a paper where he had written the story during the day. "I was a rancher's son. We weren't supposed to mix. But we fell in love. It was an impossible love that became possible." Livia listened, correcting pronunciation when necessary, but mostly just listening. And when he finished, she asked softly, "Do you still love her?" Benton remained silent for a long time. "I will always love her," he said finally. "She was the mother of my children. She was a partner during hard years, but she has been gone for 10 years. And he hesitated, I am still here. I am still alive, and I don't want to spend the rest of my life trapped in the past. He looked at Livia when he said this, looked in a way that left no doubts about what he felt. Livia felt her heart race. Benton, she began. He raised a hand, gentle. You don't need to say anything now, he said. I know it's complicated. I know you are here to teach, not to... He stopped, searching for words. But I need you to know that I admire you, that I am grateful, and that I feel things I haven't felt in a long time. Livia looked at that man. A good man, hard-working, dedicated to his children, trying desperately to fix mistakes of the past. And she realized she felt it too. Had felt it for weeks, maybe months, but was afraid to admit it. I feel it too, she said softly. I admire you too. Also, she took a deep breath, I am also falling in love. The smile that opened on Benton's face was like the sun rising after a long, dark night. It transformed his entire face, erased years of sadness, brought life back. So can we see where this goes? He asked. Slowly, no rush, but can we try? Livia nodded. We can try. And that night, when Benton kissed her for the first time, gentle and careful as if she were something too precious to be broken, Livia knew she had found not just a job, not just a purpose, but a home, a family, love. The following months would bring more challenges. Vance hadn't given up. The children still had much to learn. And the contract year was passing quickly, bringing difficult decisions about the future. But in that moment, in that quiet library lit only by the oil lamp, with the man she loved holding her face between gentle hands, Livia felt pure peace. She had made the right choice. She had accepted the impossible proposal. And she was discovering that sometimes, just sometimes, impossible things became real. August arrived, bringing cold winds down from the Stone Ridge Mountains, making the giant pines groan like ancient souls. It had been 5 months since Livia had arrived at Highland Ridge Ranch, and the transformation was undeniable. Mason could read complete sentences now, still slowly, but with growing confidence. Beatrice devoured entire books in silence, and when she sang the words she read, her voice came out clear and beautiful. Nico was already at an advanced level, reading even complex texts and doing math in his head that impressed even the farmhands, and Benton and Livia were officially a couple. Discreet still, out of respect for the children and Isabel's memory, but real. They dined together, walked the ranch at dusk, talked about everything. The children knew and approved, especially after Benton had a serious talk with each one, guaranteeing that Livia would never try to replace their mother, but would be a new and important presence in their lives. But the fragile peace was broken on a warm morning in August. Livia was in the study room with the children when they heard the sound of horses arriving. Many horses. They went to the window and saw Vance stepping down from an elegant carriage, accompanied by an older man in a black suit, round glasses, and a leather briefcase under his arm. Benton went out of the house to confront them. Livia told the children to stay inside and went to the porch. I brought a judge with me this time, Benton, Vance said with a victorious smile. Judge Anthony Bates, circuit judge for the county. He will explain to you just how wrong you are, how you owe me a lot of money for legal contracts you signed, and how you will lose this ranch anyway. The older man opened the briefcase and took out documents. Mr. Caldwell, he said with a solemn and tired voice, I have examined the contracts presented by Attorney Vance. Although there are irregularities in some, there are 3 legitimate contracts where you committed to payments that were not made. The total debt sums up to $45,000. If you do not pay in 30 days, by law, Attorney Vance may requisition equivalent assets as payment. Benton went livid. What 3 contracts? he asked. I never missed a payment on anything. Vance smiled a snake's smile. Remember when you bought that prize cattle in 1956? Remember when you contracted the renovation of the big barn in 1957? Remember when you needed special coffee seeds at the beginning of this year? Everything went through me. Everything has a signed contract. With default interest, you never paid. That's a lie, roared Benton. I paid everything on time. I have receipts. Vance shrugged. Receipts don't count if the contracts say otherwise, and the contracts have your signature, your thumbprint, your agreement. That was when Livia descended the porch steps. May I see those contracts? She asked with a calm voice. The judge looked at her surprised. And who is the young lady? Livia Sterling, she replied. Teacher to Mr. A. Caldwell's children, and a literate person who can verify if these documents are legitimate. Vance laughed loudly. The little school teacher is going to play lawyer again? Haven't you caused enough trouble? The judge, however, handed over the documents. If the young lady can read, she has the right to examine. I am a man of the law, not of trickery. Livia took the papers and read carefully. The 3 contracts looked legitimate at first glance. Benton's signature, correct dates, descriptions that matched what Vance had said. But something was wrong. Livia felt it. She studied them closer, held the papers up to the sunlight, and then she saw it. The ink on the clauses regarding default interest was different, fresher, less faded than the rest of the text, and when she looked against the light, she saw scratch marks on the paper. Someone had erased original text and written over it. These documents have been tampered with, Livia said with a firm and accusing voice. The clauses about interest were added later. You can tell by the difference in ink, by the texture of the paper where it was scraped, by the creases that don't match. They are forgeries. The judge took the papers back and examined them attentively. He took off his glasses, held the documents up to the light, ran his fingers over the paper. His face grew increasingly serious. The young lady is correct, he said finally with a grave voice. These documents were altered after the original signature. This is fraud and tampering with a legal document. Attorney Vance, you are under arrest. Vance's face changed from victorious to terrified in seconds. This is ridiculous, he shouted. You can't arrest me based on the words of some random schoolteacher. She is lying to protect her lover. The judge turned to him with an icy expression. I don't need her word. I need my own eyes, and I see clear forgery. Vance tried to run, but Benton grabbed him by the collar of his jacket, held him with the strength of a man used to taming wild bulls. You tried to steal my ranch, said Benton with a low, deadly voice. Tried to destroy my family, took advantage of my trust, of my ignorance, but you failed, because now I have someone to defend me, someone to teach me, someone to love me. He looked at Livia when he said the last phrase. She felt tears sting with emotion. The judge sent for the town sheriff. Vance was taken away in handcuffs, shouting threats and curses. Before leaving, he looked at Livia with pure hatred. You destroyed everything, he hissed. Everything I planned for years. Livia held his gaze without fear. I only stopped you from stealing what isn't yours, she replied. That isn't destruction. That is justice. When they were finally alone, Benton hugged Livia right there, in front of everyone. Thank you, he whispered against her hair. Thank you for saving me, for saving my family, for everything. The children ran out of the house and joined the hug. Even Mason, always so tough and resistant to displays of affection. They stood there, the 5 of them intertwined, while the August sun shone bright over Highland Ridge Ranch. In early September, 6 months after arriving, Livia was in the library looking for a specific book for Beatrice when she found, on the highest shelf, hidden behind dusty volumes of philosophy, a brown leather notebook tied with a faded ribbon. She pulled it down carefully. The notebook was old, pages yellowed by time. She opened to the first page and saw delicate, feminine handwriting. Educational Projects, Isabel Caldwell, 1947. Livia knew she should ask Benton before reading. These were the late wife's notes, intimate things, but curiosity was stronger. She began to leaf through it. What she discovered left her breathless. Isabel had dreamed of opening a school on the ranch. She had planned everything with meticulous detail. Drawings of classrooms with large windows for natural light. Lists of necessary materials. Teaching methods based on respect and patience. Budgets calculated carefully. Everything documented in pages and pages of pure, meticulous dreams. There was even a drawing of the school's facade. A white wooden house with 3 rooms, a small library, a courtyard with trees, and the name written in neat letters at the top of the drawing, the Isabel Caldwell School, Education for All. Livia continued reading, tears streaming down her face. Isabel had written about believing that education was a right, not a privilege. That poor children deserved the same chance as rich ones. That literacy was a weapon against injustice. And then, on the last page of the notebook, in an entry dated 2 days before going into the labor that would kill her, Isabel had written something that made Livia's heart stop. If something happens to me in this birth, if God takes me before I realize this dream, I write these words as a testament. I hope Benton finds someone who continues what I started. Someone who understands that education is a light that never goes out. I ask this person to care for him and the children with the love I will no longer be able to give, to bring life back to this house I love so much, to be happy here, without guilt, without fear of ghosts of the past. I leave my full blessing and my eternal love to whoever takes my place. May she build the school I dreamed of. May she do the good I didn't have time to do. And may she know that wherever I am, I will be grateful. Livia closed the notebook, with hands trembling violently. Sobs shook her entire body. Isabel had foreseen everything, had given permission, had blessed the future she didn't even know was coming. Benton, Livia said without turning around. She had felt his presence in the doorway. How long have you been there? Since you started crying, he replied, voice hoarse. He entered the library, closed the door. I saw you take Isabel's notebook. I was going to speak, but I wanted to see your reaction first. Livia turned to him, holding the notebook against her chest. Did you know what was inside here? She asked. Benton shook his head. I never opened it. I knew it was about the school she wanted to build, but after she died I couldn't look. It hurt too much to see dreams she would never realize. Livia extended the notebook to him. You need to read it now, she said. Need to see what she wrote on the last page. Benton took the notebook reverently. He sat in the armchair near the window and began to read, slowly, sounding out some harder words, but reading. Livia saw the exact moment he reached the last entry. His face twisted, tears began to fall. When he finished, he sat in silence for a long time. Finally, he looked at Livia. She gave permission, he said, astonished. She blessed it. She wanted me to move on. Livia knelt in front of him, held his hands between hers. She loved you, she said softly. Truly. And because she loved you, she wanted your happiness, even if it wasn't with her. Benton pulled Livia into a tight embrace. They cried together, releasing years of stored pain, carried guilt, fear of betraying a precious memory. And when they finally separated, something had changed. The weight Benton carried had diminished. It hadn't disappeared completely, never would disappear, but it had diminished. Let's build her school, said Benton with a firm voice. Let's do exactly as she planned, the Isabel Caldwell School, to honor her memory, to realize her dream, together. Livia nodded, emotion closing her throat. Together, she agreed. It was that night, after dinner, after the children had gone to sleep, that Benton asked Livia to marry him. It wasn't a fancy or romantic proposal. It was simple and direct, just the way he was. They were in the library, sitting side by side in the big armchair, reading Isabel's notebook together, planning how to make her dream a reality. Benton stopped in the middle of a sentence about literacy methods and looked at Livia. "Marry me," he said, "for real, not for a contract, not out of obligation, but because I love you and want to spend the rest of my life by your side." Livia felt her heart race. She looked at that man. A good man, hard-working, dedicated, loving. A man who had been through so much pain but still managed to love. A man who had trusted her when she was a desperate stranger. A man who had changed completely for the love of his children. "Yes," she said, voice thick with emotion. 1,000 times yes. Benton smiled, that rare and beautiful smile that transformed his entire face. He took a simple gold ring from his pocket. "It belonged to my grandmother," he explained. "I kept it for years. I think she would be happy knowing it's going to you." He placed the ring on Livia's finger. It fit perfectly, as if it had been made for her. And when Benton kissed her, gentle and deep at the same time, Livia knew she had found not just a home, she had found everything. They told the children the next day. The reaction was mixed, but positive. Nico jumped for joy, shouting he was going to have a mum again. Beatrice hugged Livia tightly, whispering thanks in her ear, and Mason, after a moment of heavy silence, extended his hand to Livia. "Welcome to the family," he said, voice raspy. "For real this time." And when Livia shook his hand, he pulled her into a quick but sincere hug. Mrs. Elvira cried with joy and immediately started planning a wedding feast. Father Anselm, when Benton went to town to ask him to perform the ceremony, hesitated only for a second before agreeing with a genuine smile. The following months were of intense preparation. The wedding was set for January, 9 months after Livia had arrived. Meanwhile, the lessons continued. The children's progress was impressive. Mason wrote letters now, documenting the ranch work in his own notebook. Beatrice composed beautiful poems that she recited without stuttering when she sang. Nico devoured math and science books Benton ordered specially for him. And Benton read fluently now. Contracts, newspapers, books. He read to the children at night, read ranch documents during the day, read letters that arrived. The vulnerability had disappeared. In its place was confidence and pride. It was in late October that Vance tried one last time. He managed to get out of jail on bail and sent a threatening letter. Said that even out on bail he had powerful friends, that he was going to destroy the ranch one way or another, that Livia was going to regret meddling in affairs that weren't hers. Benton wanted to go to the police immediately, but Livia had a better idea. She sat down and wrote a detailed letter to Judge Anthony Bates, documenting all of Vance's attempts at fraud. She attached copies of the forged contracts, attached written testimonies from sharecroppers who had witnessed bribery attempts, attached everything they had discovered. A week later, they received a reply. Vance had been sentenced to 3 years in prison for forgery and attempted fraud. All fraudulent contracts were annulled, and the judge personally apologized to Benton for almost having been deceived. Finally, they were free, free of threats, free of fear, free to build a future without shadows of the past hovering over them. January 1959 dawned sunny and warm. The wedding day had arrived. Livia woke up early in the room she had occupied for 9 months, looked out the window at the green coffee fields stretching as far as the eye could see, and felt gratitude so deep she could barely breathe. Mrs. Elvira entered bringing coffee and bread. "Your big day, child," she said with tears in her eyes. "You're going to look beautiful." The dress she had sewn with love and care hung in the wardrobe. It was simple but elegant, white linen with delicate lace on the sleeves and neckline, a cinched waist, a skirt that went down to the ankles. Beatrice ran in, already dressed in a new light blue dress. "I brought flowers for your hair," she said excitedly. "Picked them in the garden we fixed up. White roses, your favorites." Livia let Beatrice fix her hair, pinning it in a low bun decorated with fresh roses. Mrs. Elvira helped her put on the dress, adjusting every detail. When Livia looked at herself in the small bedroom mirror, she almost didn't recognize herself. She was beautiful, happy, radiant. The ceremony was at the small church in St. Thomas Creek. The church was full. Ranch hands, neighbors, shopkeepers from town, everyone had come. Livia's story had spread. The poor girl who saved a rich family, the teacher who transformed wild children, the woman who conquered the heart of a bitter widower. Mason walked Livia down the aisle to his father in a beautiful, symbolic gesture. "You take good care of her," he said seriously to Benton. "She's a treasure." Benton nodded, emotion shining in his eyes. "I will," he promised, "with my life." Nico held the rings, proud of the responsibility. And when the moment came for Beatrice to do her part, to read the poem she had written for the occasion, Livia held her breath. Beatrice stepped up to the altar, paper trembling in her hands. She took several deep breaths, then began to recite, and she didn't stutter, not once. The words came out clear, beautiful, emotional, but firm. "Love is a light that conquers the dark," she recited. "It is a hand extended when everything falls apart. It is a second chance when hope ends. It is finding family where there was no one. It is learning that starting over is always worth it." There wasn't a dry eye in the church. Livia cried openly. Benton had tears running into his beard. And when Beatrice finished and looked at Livia with a huge, triumphant smile, Livia knew that was one of the most important moments of her life. Father Anselm declared them husband and wife. Benton kissed Livia with a tenderness that made her heart melt. The entire church applauded, and when they walked out holding hands under a shower of rice and flower petals, the sun shone so bright that everything looked golden. The reception was at the ranch, under the ancient pine trees. Long tables full of food that Mrs. Elvira and other women had prepared for days, fiddle and accordion music, dancing, laughter, pure joy radiating from everyone. In the middle of the party, Benton asked for silence. He climbed onto a chair, held Livia's hand to help her up too. He had an important announcement to make. "When I hired Livia," he began, "I offered my ranch in exchange for teaching my children. I promised that if they learned to read, write, and do math in 1 year, everything would be hers." He paused dramatically. "Well, it hasn't been a year yet. There are 3 months left. But my children already know everything I promised and much more, so technically the ranch is already hers." The crowd murmured in surprise. Livia looked at Benton, confused. "But," he continued with a smile, "I think we're going to change the deal." He gestured for Mason to bring something. The boy appeared carrying a large rolled-up paper. Benton unrolled it and showed it to everyone. It was the deed to the ranch. Livia saw her name there, Livia Sterling Caldwell now, as co-owner, together with Benton. "Half the ranch is yours," Benton explained, "by right of marriage, but mostly by merit. You saved this family, you deserve everything and more." He continued, "The other half will be divided. 1/3 for Mason, 1/3 for Beatrice, 1/3 for Nico when they turn 21. And 5 acres of the most beautiful land near the creek will be permanently donated for the construction of the Isabel Caldwell School, which we begin building next month." The crowd exploded in applause. The children hugged their father and Livia. And as the party continued into the night, Livia danced with her husband under the stars and knew life couldn't be more perfect. The following months were hard but rewarding work. Construction of the Isabel Caldwell School began in February. Benton mobilized sharecroppers and neighbors. Some contributed labor, others materials, others cash donations. They followed exactly the plans Isabel had left in the notebook. Livia planned the curriculum, chose books, prepared materials. Mason, now 17 and literate, offered to teach manual labor and agriculture. Beatrice, 14, to teach literature and music. Nico, 11, would help with basic math. In April 1959, exactly 1 year after Livia had arrived at the ranch, the Isabel Caldwell School opened its doors. It was a beautiful white wooden building, exactly as Isabel had drawn. 3 classrooms with large windows, a small but well-equipped library, a courtyard with trees for shade. 47 children enrolled on the first day. Children of sharecroppers, neighboring ranchers, town shopkeepers, poor folks who never imagined being able to study, all learning together, without distinction of class or status. On Inauguration Day, Benton gave an emotional speech. "This school exists because of 3 women," he said, voice thick. "My late wife Isabel, who dreamed it first. My wife Livia, who made it a reality. And all the mothers here who believe education can change their children's destiny." Livia cut the ribbon with large scissors. The children ran inside, exploring the rooms, touching the books with reverence, sitting at the new desks. And when the first lesson began, with Livia teaching the alphabet to a group of attentive children, she looked out the window and saw Benton watching from outside, pride stamped on his face. The following years brought growth and prosperity. The school gained a reputation for excellence. Children came from neighboring villages to study. Mason became a respected teacher, teaching not just letters, but values of hard work and honesty. Beatrice published a book of poems that sold well in the region. Nico won a scholarship to study engineering in the state capital. Livia and Benton had 3 children of their own. Helen was born in 1960, Robert in 1962, and Anthony in 1964. The house that had been so silent and sad, filled with laughter, running footsteps, games, misses. Elvira continued cooking for the family until her 80s, when she finally retired to live in a comfortable cottage Benton built for her at the back of the property. Highland Ridge Ranch prospered. The coffee fields produced record harvests. The cattle won prizes at regional fairs. But most importantly, it became an example of justice and education. Benton treated the sharecroppers with dignity, paid fair wages, offered decent housing, and the school kept growing year after year. Vance served his time in prison and disappeared from the region when he got out. He never tried to approach the ranch or the family again. 20 years later, in 1979, Livia was sitting on the porch of the school on a warm April afternoon. She was 44 now, hair starting to grey at the temples, wrinkles around her eyes from smiling so much. She watched the children play in the yard during recess. Benton, 66, hair completely white but still strong and active, sat beside her. He took her hand in his, an automatic gesture after so many years together. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. Livia smiled. "I'm thinking about that day in April 1958, she replied, "when I accepted your absurd proposal, when I thought I was crazy for trusting a stranger offering a whole ranch in exchange for teaching 3 children to read." Benton laughed. "It really was an absurd proposal," he agreed, "but it was the best thing I ever did." Livia looked around, at the school full of life, at the green coffee fields, at the renovated, beautiful house, at her grandchildren playing with other kids, at the life they had built together. "I didn't just win a ranch," she said thoughtfully. "I won a family, I won a purpose, I won love, I won everything." Benton kissed the top of her head. "And I won salvation," he said. "You saved me from myself, saved my children, brought light back to a place that was dying of darkness." Mason appeared on the porch, now a man of 37, married and father of 4. "I bring good news. The town council approved the school expansion. We'll be able to build 2 more classrooms and hire more teachers." Livia smiled radiantly. "Isabel would be proud," she said. Benton nodded, eyes shining with emotion. She really would. That night, after everyone had gone, Livia went to the library. Isabel's notebook was kept in a special box on the shelf. She took it out carefully, opened to the last page, reread the words she knew by heart. I leave my full blessing and my eternal love to whoever takes my place. May she build the school I dreamed of. May she do the good I didn't have time to do. I did it, Livia whispered to Isabel's spirit, wherever she was. I built your school. I did good. I took care of your family. I loved your husband. I honored your memory. I hope wherever you are at peace. And in that silence of the old library, Livia felt something, a warm, gentle, grateful presence. She wasn't afraid. It was like a final blessing, like Isabel saying thank you, like complete peace finally achieved. Livia closed the notebook, put it back in the box, and left the library. Benton was waiting at the door of their bedroom. He extended his hand. She took it. They went in together, and while the silver moon shone over Highland Ridge Ranch, illuminating the coffee fields, the school, the house full of life and love, Livia thought about the impossible proposal she had accepted so long ago. I will give you my ranch if you teach my children to read. It seemed absurd. It seemed impossible. But it had been the beginning of everything. It had been the seed that germinated into a massive tree bearing fruit that fed hundreds. Because education wasn't just about letters, it was about freedom. It was about dignity. It was about the future. It was about hope. And hope, Livia had learned, was the most powerful thing that existed, stronger than fear, stronger than despair, stronger than impossibility. Hope was what transformed a poor girl into an agent of change, lost children into fulfilled adults, a dying ranch into a center of life and learning, survival into legacy. The Isabel Caldwell School would continue teaching for generations. Children would continue learning, and the power of letters, the power of education, would continue spreading like light conquering darkness. That was the most important lesson, the one Livia taught not with words, but with living example, not with theories, but with a dedicated life. And that lesson, passed from heart to heart, from generation to generation, would change the world. One child at a time. One family at a time. One act of courage at a time. Because in the end, that was what mattered. Not land, not riches, but people. Connections, love, a legacy of kindness left behind. And Highland Ridge Ranch, which had been a place of deep sadness, had become a beacon of shining hope, proving that always, always, it is possible to start over, always possible to transform, always possible to find love and purpose where one least expects it. This was the story of Livia and Benton, of Mason, Beatrice, and Nico, of Isabel, whose dream transcended her own death, of Mrs. Elvira, who believed when no one else did, of everyone who understood that education had the power to change destinies. And this story would continue, forever, as long as there was someone willing to teach, someone willing to learn, someone willing to believe that impossible is just a word, not a destiny. Because the best stories, the truest ones, never really end. They just transform. They just continue. They just live.